Hello. Is it recording now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. All right, last session of the day. You ready for this? Should we close the door or wait another minute? All right, welcome everyone. My name is Oyvind Kallstad. This session is going to be about delivering a complex script project, a practical approach. And since it's the last session of the day, I promise I will try to keep it a bit short so that you can get back to the hotel and relax a little bit. So let's get started. Yep, the agenda. I'm going to do a little introduction and then I'm going to talk a little bit about planning, how we plan a project, and the next stage being the development and testing, documentation, delivery, and some lessons learned. And we have a session perhaps with some questions and discussions afterwards, if somebody wants to ask anything or talk about something specific. So this all happened a while ago while I was contracting with a pretty large Norwegian company. I was in the server team, and you probably are familiar with this, but after a while it was known that I knew how to script, and I became the go-to guy for every kind of little task needed some scripting done. And one day the team leader for the storage department came to me and said that he had a VB script that it didn't work anymore, and asked if I could take a look at it and try to figure out what was wrong and fix it for him. Now it's been many years since I've been writing or reading VB script, but I said, yeah, sure, I can take a look at it. I didn't really have the time, but I said, I'll do it as a favor. And it was 1,000 lines of VB script, and you know how VB scripts can be. It's quite verbose, and it was a mess. And unbeknownst to me, he'd actually approached the other colleague of mine. He was the only other guy in the whole company that knew how to script with the exact same question. So I talked to him, and we discovered that he had approached us both. We decided that we could do this together as a project. And none of us were eager to actually go in and do debugging on an old VB script that we didn't knew anything about. So we decided it's probably faster and easier for us to just scrap the whole thing and rebuild in PowerShell. And we went back to the team leader for the storage team and asked him if that was okay, that we did this as a project together and read the script in PowerShell, and he agreed. So that's what we did. And that's kind of the thing that I'm going to go through in this presentation. I'm going to walk through our process of running this as a more formalized project with 2 developers. So it won't be a lot of demos. It will be more overall stuff, but I have something that I can show you. And yeah, let's go ahead. So yeah, so that's the case study, the script, the purpose of the script that we got. They had to move a large number of home shares. They had invested in a new SAN infrastructure, and they needed to move 30,000 user home areas or something from the old one to the new one. And that was the purpose of the VB script. So that was a script that was made for them years ago. When they tested it, it just didn't work anymore. So our job was to replicate the functionality of the VB script to get that job done. So as with any, before I start, just a little disclaimer. I'm not a project manager, so I will probably use the wrong terminology and stuff if any of you are project managers or know anyone. So bear with me in that regards. So the first thing that you need to do, of course, is to plan. And the more time you spend on planning, the more time you can work uninterrupted during development. And that's actually a lesson that everyone can take to heart, even if you're just working on your own scripts. So even just a small script that you're doing for yourself or doing for a colleague, it's a mini project, really. And if you treat it like that and follow a simple process, you will save yourself a lot of time and tears later on. Welcome. Yeah, so of course, one of the main purposes of the planning phase is to, try to anticipate any scenario that might appear, and of course, even more important is to understand the requirements of the customer. That customer might be yourself, or a colleague, or a proper customer. So I tend to split the planning phase into two phases. This is what I call the external planning phase and the internal planning phase. I'm going to explain a little bit what I mean by that. So the first part of it is, of course, the external planning phase, which means the part where you talk to your customer. Probably one of the most important one. And let's see if I can get it up and running again. Okay. There you go. Yeah. So the external planning phase, you talk to the customer, and this one is really important, of course, because you really need to understand the requirements. You have to talk with them and agree on the scope and the boundaries, the requirements, the input-output. This is a script after all, so it's got something going in and something going out. And you will save yourself a lot of time by talking about this early on and agreeing on paper, both parties. Before you start, what is the input, what is the output, what is the requirement, and so on. I also used to say that you shouldn't take any technical design decisions in this phase. Usually, and that happens a lot if your customer is also a technician or know a lot about technology, you talk about, okay, you have to use Robocopy to that's my requirement, but try to steer away from that. The requirement is to copy files, not to use Robocopy to copy files. And because if you start taking technical design decisions at this stage, you are bound by them, because that's the only thing that the customer will remember from it. So unless there's a really strong requirement from the customer to use a specific technology or a tool or whatever, of course then you have to go with it, but try to keep it as general as possible. And in this case, for us, okay, I'll just jump a little bit back and forth. The result of the external planning looked something like this. We decided on a scope. The scope was that we were to copy the home share to a new location for all the users. We needed to update the Active Directory object for every user. We needed to log the results for both the failures and the successes. And just generally keep the functionality of the old script as much as possible. The most notable of those were that there was a functionality in the VB script to keep checking for logged on users so that they can run it during business hours, but because this was an international company spread all around the world, there was always someone logged in. So they needed to check for open files or logged on users to the home share servers and try to retry a couple of times before giving up and logging everything. And of course, the input and output stuff was quite easy in this case because we had a script and they wanted it to work pretty much the same. So they had a CSV file as input with two properties, a username and a path, which would be the path to the new home area. They didn't want to change that input type. That was okay by us. The output, of course, aside from things being done, was a log file, with the results, so that they could go through, because this was going to run for several thousand users, going to run overnight or the weekend, whatever. So they needed to just check up on the log file and see, what failed and what went okay and stuff like that. We also discussed documentation, which of course is part of the requirements. And lucky for us, they didn't really have any strong requirements for documentation. So as long as we had good commented code, it was okay for him, which made us happy, saved us a lot of time. And so that was the external planning phase. And after that comes the internal planning, and that's when the team sits down for the first time and goes through the results of the external planning and starts to plan the project. And the team in this case, of course, was just me and my colleague. And for you, it might be just yourself. So just book a room for yourself and sit there for a couple of hours and think this through. So this is the phase where we review the tools, the infrastructure, and the manpower and the time available. And there, in that meeting, we took the technical design decisions because it was our decision what type of technology we were going to use. At that meeting, we also drew a logical map of the project, or in this case, the script. And we also started to subdivide the tasks. And in that part, we also after having identified and divided the tasks, we converted them into functions. So I'm going to go through a little bit. So this is kind of the first, the result of the first things that we talked about. We knew, of course, the language we were going to script in was PowerShell. We had some external tools that we were going to use. Robocopy, because that was the easiest to use. That's what they used in the old VB script, and so we can reuse part of that code. OneNote, and the reason for that is because this company was decidedly non-DevOpsy company. So there was a development department, but they were organized in a totally different branch of the organization. So we didn't know them or had access to their tools or anything. So we didn't have any source control software available. We did not have any testing suite available. So we pretty much had to make do with what we had. So that was a shared OneNote to keep track of the project, and just a regular file share for the script itself.
What did you use to map out the logic?
We used Visio actually just to draw the diagrams. So we had it available on our laptops, and it works, and it's easy to use, in a meeting room. Quickly draw it out. But the examples I'm going to use now, I'm just going to use pseudocode. That works just as well, I think. So it all depends on you. But sometimes it's okay to just stand and draw on the board, and then it's easy if boxes, and just take a picture afterwards. So. And we also went through some internal tools, stuff we had lying around that we could reuse. I'd just before pretty much written a logging module that was 99% done. And since logging was a prerequisite of the project, we decided to use that module to save us a lot of time. And of course, we were reliant on some external infrastructure, in this case, Active Directory. The manpower was easy. It was 2 people, roughly 50% divided between us in time. We had a lot of other things to do as well. And we started to work on the design, and here I'm using pseudocode. What we actually did was using Visio, as I said, but just to illustrate here, and since we are developers after all, I thought we'd use pseudocode. So the kind of the 0.1 version of the script logic looks something like this. For each user in the input, we were to get the old home share from Active Directory. We need to copy the file from the old share to the new share, and we need to update the object in Active Directory. Nice and simple overall. I think in this, when you do this kind of pseudocode and design decisions, at least for me, I like to just start just at the top, start really general, and just slowly go more and more into the details. So, and that's what we did. And so for the next iteration of the logic, we just started fleshing out what the script was going to do. So you see that we have some additional stuff in there. We now also know that we need to check for active connections to the server. And if there is an active connection, we need to have a collection to keep track of users that were logged on at the time the script was run. So there's a simple if-else there. So if there's an active connection, we just add it to a group, but we copy anyway, right? You do that with RoboCopy to save time. You do the copy job anyway to copy what we can do. And but the only difference is that if there are any active connections, we don't touch the Active Directory object, of course. And we continue to flesh it out. This time we implemented, the functionality of the number of passes and the skipping of users and that functionality. So we have a do pass here. We keep track of our current pass. And that's all because they wanted some parameters to control, how many passes should you run to do the retry for each user, and a possible delay between each. So that's kind of the logic that we have added in there to handle that process. And then we started on subdividing the tasks because we were two developers. We needed to divide the tasks between us, and working with a script, what better way to do that than to actually divide the task units into functions. So we just fleshed out the different functions that we knew we would need based on what we had done with the pseudocode, or the Visio in our case. And then these functions came out as something that we needed to use in our script. So we have, what we decided to do is that we have a function called getInfo. So our idea was that before we start, we just have one function that collects all the information that we would need later in our script. Because we needed to read stuff from Active Directory, and we need to check for active users and stuff like that. Now that's actually a separate one under there. And my colleague, he's a real stiffer for the details. So he wanted us to also have an invoke sanity check function that we ran quite early on, just to make sure that everything was okay before we continued in the script. And if I get the time, I can show you how that looks. And it's pretty much checking stuff like, okay, can I connect to Active Directory? Can I read the Active Directory object? And check that the new and the home path are different. If they are the same, then we don't have to do anything, stuff like that. And can I actually connect to the server that I need to for the next function there, get user connection? We need to connect to the server to check that. So the sanity check would stop you if that connection were broken. No point in going further after that. And get user connection, of course, which just checks the server if the user have any open files. And we have the RoboCopy wrapper itself, and a function to update the Active Directory user, and of course the logging functions there. And the most of the logic we wrapped into a function called invoke process input. So that was kind of, for after going through all this other stuff, we packed everything. That's where all the other stuff goes. please just interrupt me and, if you have any questions or comments. So the point of this is just to show our approach to this, of course, and hopefully we'll get you some ideas that you can take with you and use in a similar kind of project. And yeah, so the next stage then, of course, is development and testing. Yeah, Bruce.
How did you manage the variable namespace? Because of the way PowerShell handles variables, it's easy to stomp on each other.
Yeah, well, we actually did all the logic together before we started.
Did you have a convention for naming, for example, to keep stomping on each other?
No, not other than that. We actually, as you see here, we made this list together. So we decided together, the function names and the inputs and the outputs, and that way we knew that all the functions would fit together.
So you didn't use any global, you didn't
No.
use any implicit parameters?
No.
Everything was explicit. Good.
Yep. So we actually did a change later on. Yeah, Jim.
Sorry, did you figure out piping as well? Like which ones would pipe to each other?
Yeah, we did that. I will actually show that how we actually built, the first logical part of the project.
But
And
I've learned in my own stuff when I'm speccing that if I don't spec the piped parameters in advance,
Yeah.
I forget to do it later on.
yeah, what we did in the first version, we actually did it like this. So we sat down and we agreed on the parameters and the output of all the functions. And later on, we actually discovered that because always in project, suddenly there's a change, to the requirements, and we had to go into the code and make some adjustments. And my colleague actually suggested that instead of having these explicit parameters, since we do have this getInfo function running at the beginning, his idea, and we actually implemented that in kind of a 1.2 version of the script, was to just generate a custom object and have that custom object be the input for all the other functions. In that way, if we had to add some new functionality, we can just update that object, and that would automatically get inputted to all the other functions. So, but for the first version, it looked like this. Any other questions? No? Okay, cool. Yeah, Bruce?
Were you doing PDD? Driven development?
No, not at all. We didn't even know what the word meant at the time. So we were just two geeks, we were the scripters of the operations department, and we were thrown this in our lap, and then we just tried to learn how to swim,
Earlier you said you had some regression tests that you were running for each component. I'm wondering if you were doing testing first, like writing the test specs first.
No, it seems like we were into something right, since you actually assume that, because this was all our ideas, unique for us at the moment. So just common sense.
Yeah, common sense is an oxymoron.
All right, so then it's the development and testing phase. And what we did was create a master script with all the functions that we have already decided, the name and the input and output. I call them dummy functions here, but that's just because they are empty. But we would just fill them out later on. What we did was we just had one script and just added in code as we went along. But in hindsight, it might perhaps have been better to just dot source the different functions as separate files. Or use a module, yeah. So there's a lot of different ways of doing this, and that's why I also like to have a lessons learned part in these kind of projects, because then you can discuss, the different things that you could have done, and perhaps try that next time if it makes sense. Yeah, so the development and testing phase is kind of self-explanatory. You sit in code and we work each at our own place, and so what we pretty much did was we had the list of functions, and we just divided them in two and said, okay, you do these functions and I do these functions. And when we're done, we just put it together and test it. But what we did before we did that is what I'm going to show you now, that it actually worked pretty well. Yeah, so let me see. Come on. Is that okay? Size? Oh, you don't see anything. Then I guess. Woo. Oh, that was not so smart because then I can't see anything. Yeah, so so this is just an example, a stripped down version of what's to be kind of the scaffolding of the script. So our idea was that we would develop together the logic, the script logic, together before we started working on the individual functions. And we thought that would work pretty well since we had already decided on the inputs and the outputs and the parameters and the names and everything. And we have drawn out in Visio, or in this case pseudocode, what was supposed to happen. So what we did is we just created the start of the script. We added in all the functions with nothing but return true in them. And, oh, why is that happening? So you can see we just wrote down all the functions here. And then we started to, so this is the function I talked about, the invoke process input. So as you see, what we decided that every function except the first one, I think, should return a Boolean, true or false, because that made the logic quite easy to follow. The first thing you do, you run the get info to just gather all the information that you would need later on. And after that, we ran the sanity check, and only if that returned true are we okay to continue on, right? So if the invoke sanity check, then we continue. And here I actually used, that's the input info from there. And so if that's true, then we move on, and then we have the get user connection, check if there are any user connections, and again, a Boolean. Only if that returns true or we go to continue. And then we have the wrapper itself, which then will copy files, of course. And if that goes okay, then we are okay to update the Active Directory user. And of course, in this part, we had to add some additional logic because we wanted to do a file copy even if there were connections found, right, to save some time. So. Yeah, so that comes there. And we keep track of what we need to skip because of open files. And we copy files anyway. And in this example, I just have a write warning, but of course you would replace that with a write log or something, right? You have to write log the problems as they happen. And lastly, we have the logic itself to handle the skipping of open files and the delay between passes and number of passes and stuff like that. So when we were finished with this, because we did this together in the meeting room, it took us an hour from we started to we done this. The good thing about this is that we could run it and test and validate that the logic of the script was actually working. So we can just run it like that. And you can just go up to the functions and simulate. Okay, this returns true. You can just simulate that it would fail. And we run it again. And then like that, we went through all the functions and simulated a true or a false on all the different steps and made sure that the logic was sound. And we didn't write any line of code in any of the functions at this point. The only thing that we knew the name of the function and the parameters, the inputs, and the outputs. So we did that. So we sat in a meeting room together and did all the different kinds of scenarios for what can go wrong and how the script would react to all the different cases and that the logging was okay and stuff like that. So that's when we were done with that, when we were satisfied that everything was okay, that's when we divided the functions between us, went each to our own and sat down and started developing the functions and doing testing on our own, just for those functions. And we were done. We just filled out the function with proper code instead of just return false, just fill it out with code. And we were satisfied that it would work, right? Because the output should be a true or false, and we have tested all the different scenarios. right. Any questions to this before I move on? Is all green? Super green? All right. Now I lost my cursor. No, there it is. All right, the fun part, documentation, what we all love. It's, when you start looking at doing scripts as a project as opposed to just quite technical guys themselves, so as long as we commented our code, and the most important thing for him was that it worked pretty much, and that you had a log file so you can keep track of what happened, what do they need to go in and look at. And in that regard, if you don't do it already, you really should get in the habit of documenting your code while you are writing the code. It's easy to think that I'll just do that at the end. It's much more fun to actually sit and code, right? So, because in our case, that meant that we could just do a copy-paste of the code with all the comments, smack it into a Word document, and that's documentation. You might not be as lucky as we were. In that case, you probably have to write some proper documentation. And I also hope that you would use comment-based help when you write functions. That also will help a lot in covering parts of the documentation, at least the functionality of what you're writing. Again, you can probably do a copy-paste of the comment-based help into a Word document or whatever. So I didn't know you were going to be here, June, but I'm thinking that you're warm inside now.
They have a different audience with a different perspective and a different subject matter. So while it's great to have something rather than nothing, and I totally understand being busy and not wanting to do it, I think that if you were going to grab anything for comment-based help, it would have been your pseudocode, which was at least a documentation of the user experience, and you could have easily made those into help examples.
Yep.
Because that was really closer to help than your code comments, which I assume say, like, I've chosen to do this because this, or this section, does the copy part.
We didn't press the matter because we thought we were quite lucky to get away with it. So.
Absolutely.
That's how consultants work.
Yeah. All right. All right. Let's see if I can actually get through this problem. And now you don't see anything? Now you do.
Hurry before blue screens again.
Yeah. Hurry. All right. Delivery. Of course, at this point, you're pretty much done, right? You've done your part, so this is the boring stuff. But it's important to sit down with the customer after you've done your job and sit down and actually have a proper handover. Let them look at a test first with some sort of small scale with some dummy data, and preferably with a subset with real data. And let them look at the output, the log files, and look at how it works. And agree before you leave. Agree that it meets all the expectations, all the requirements, and everything that you decided on the planning meeting. That way they can come back and complain, right? That it didn't work as expected and stuff like that. And also, if you have documentation, this will be the moment where you show them documentation and get an OK for that as well, of course. So I'm not going to run the finished code because that's not going to work, I think. But
I have a question. How many days did you guys have to deliver this project?
I think,
Days or-
yeah, well, we actually had,
So what was the budget?
the budget was just time,
Yeah,
because,
so when was the time budget?
yeah, it was quite hilarious because both me and my colleague were actually 100% busy before he came to us, and his time frame to us was as soon as possible. So you know the deal, yeah, you know the deal. So it's the only thing we said, okay, we'll do our best. We will work with this in between, you know, and it took a couple of weeks, but of course it was an hour here, hour there, you know. So it wasn't. We didn't sit down and work for 1 week with just this because we couldn't do that. We had so much other stuff that we needed to do, and I guess many of you can relate to that kind of pressure, right?
Every other development.
Yeah. So yeah, let's see if I can show you the. So if I do like this now. Does it work? Yeah, so the funny part was that when we first looked at the VB script, 1,000 lines of messy VB code, we kind of laughed a bit, you know, felt much better than that, and we're certain that in replacing it with PowerShell would also mean shrinking the number of lines of code and be, you know, much better and future-proof and everything. And this is the final product. I'm just going to scroll down. So we ended up with 1,000 lines of PowerShell code instead. But
Yeah,
mu-
you can reduce it if
yeah, of course. Yeah, but the point wasn't to get the line number down. But this is what happens, you know, because if you strip out all the help, all the error handling, all the logging, of course you are down to 300 lines or whatever, you know, or 500. So a lot of it is to make sure that, you know, you handle the errors and you write all the logs and you have, you know, common-based help on all the functions and everything. Yeah, Bruce.
Speaking of that, that's exactly what DSC lets you do. It gets rid of all the error checking and all
Yeah.
the
Mm.
that you have to put in. Kenneth has a wonderful slide. Yeah, he has a great slide showing the difference between production code and fake code. You probably didn't have at DSC when you were writing this. But
No.
it'd be interesting to think about whether it would simplify your script quite a lot.
Mm.
Because you got like you look at the basic functionality and then 2/3 of it ends up being error handling.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much. No, we didn't have any possibility of using those tools at all in the company.
I think a lot of people that are non-Norwegian probably are not as used to the very small organizations. Maybe some of us have to face.
Yeah, that may be. Yeah, when I say big company, that's relative to Norway, which no, it's it's not that big of a country. So yeah.
It's my experience that if you work for a larger company and do scripts that are applied to large numbers of people, you actually have to take a very good look at the performance of your script. Did you
Yeah.
have any issues?
No, not at all. And because the only thing that they were concerned about regarding performance were, you know, the mechanism for handling the retries and the skipping of users and stuff like that. So because they just wanted something that they can just run and just check upon the next day, you know, and is it done? Because they weren't pressed for time in that way. They just needed to know that when it was done, that they needed to know exactly what went okay and what failed. Because then we just had to strip out the ones that failed and rerun for those only, or perhaps they had to check out why it failed and stuff like that. So
Did you have to deal with, for example, connections that are dropping or stuff like that, or was it all local on the network?
no, it was local in the network in that sense, yeah. So I don't think I had any more slides. Yeah, Bruce.